After the wedding, I couldn't shake what I'd overheard between Emma and Claire. I debated confronting Caroline, but worried it would come across as paranoid. Instead, I tried to let it go, telling myself the worst was behind us. I was wrong. A week after we returned from our honeymoon, Caroline's parents invited us over for dinner. I assumed it was to celebrate our new life together, but as soon as we sat down, Emma was there, her usual smug expression plastered across her face. "Did you tell them about the dress?" Emma asked casually, sipping her wine. Caroline glared at her. "What about it?" Emma smirked. "You didn't tell them it was my fault?" The room went silent. Her parents looked shocked, while I felt my chest tighten. "It wasn't an accident, was it?" I asked, my voice low. Emma's smirk faded for a moment before she shrugged. "It doesn't matter now, does it? The wedding's over." Caroline stared at her sister, then at me. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone defensive. I explained what I'd overheard between Emma and Claire, expecting her to side with me. Instead, she rolled her eyes. "Are you seriously still hung up on this? It's just a dress." I couldn't believe it. Not only was Emma unapologetic, but Caroline didn't seem to care. Her parents, however, were furious. They demanded Emma leave the table, scolding her for ruining such an important day. Emma stormed out, but not before muttering, "You'll regret taking his side." I didn't realize how true those words would be. What Emma did next shook our already fragile marriage to its core. Emma's storming out of the family dinner felt like a victory at first. Caroline's parents seemed to be on my side, which gave me a small sense of relief. But Emma wasn't the type to let things go. A few days later, her revenge started to take shape. It began with rumors. Caroline's friends started mentioning strange things to her. Whispers that I had been rude to Emma during the wedding planning, that I'd made her feel unwelcome, and even that I tried to sabotage Caroline's family relationships. None of it was true, but Emma was relentless. Caroline confronted me one evening after one of her friends brought up the rumors. "Why would Emma say these things about you?" she asked, her arms crossed. "Because she's mad I called her out," I said. "She's trying to make me the bad guy." Caroline frowned but didn't respond, which made me realize she was entertaining the possibility that Emma might be right. I could feel the tension between us growing, and no matter what I said, Caroline seemed to drift further into doubt. Then came the final blow. Emma went to Caroline's parents, claiming I had yelled at her during the wedding and called her names. It was a complete fabrication, but it forced another family meeting. Sitting in their living room, I tried to defend myself while Emma played the victim, tears streaming down her face as she recounted her version of events. To my surprise, Caroline's parents didn't buy it. "Emma, we know you've been stirring up trouble," her father said sternly. "We've had enough." Emma's tears dried up instantly, replaced by a look of pure rage. She stormed out again, but this time, she didn't just leave quietly. She made sure to leave a parting shot. "You'll all regret this. Every single one of you." Little did I know, she meant it. What came next would make the wedding day incident feel like nothing in comparison. After that explosive family meeting, Emma disappeared. At first, no one thought much of it. Caroline assumed her sister was just sulking after being called out, and even her parents seemed relieved to have a break from her constant drama. But when Emma stopped responding to calls and texts entirely, the worry started to set in. "Maybe she just needs some space," I suggested one evening, though even I wasn't convinced. Something about her dramatic exit didn't sit right with me. A few days later, Caroline received a panicked call from their mother. "Emma's not answering, and no one has seen her for days," she said, her voice trembling. "We're calling the police." Suddenly, Emma's absence became a full-blown crisis. Missing person flyers were printed, her name was broadcast on local news stations, and Caroline was spiraling with guilt. "I should have checked on her," she said, pacing the living room. "What if something happened because of me?" I wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Emma's disappearance wasn't what it seemed. Her parting words at the family meeting, "You'll all regret this," echoed in my mind. It felt like one of her elaborate schemes, a way to shift the attention back onto herself. My suspicions deepened when Caroline's parents received a cryptic note in the mail. It was written in Emma's handwriting and simply said, "You'll miss me when I'm gone." Caroline broke down in tears when she read it, but I couldn't ignore how staged it felt. This doesn't add up, I told Caroline, but she dismissed me. She's missing, and you're still trying to make this about you, she snapped. I let it go for her sake, but my instincts told me Emma wasn't truly in danger. And soon, a twist would prove just how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted. Emma's disappearance dominated the next 2 weeks. The police conducted interviews, search parties combed through the area, and her parents were barely holding it together. Caroline blamed herself, and our already tense relationship became unbearable. She couldn't look at me without resentment in her eyes, as if I were somehow responsible for Emma's vanishing act. Then, one afternoon, everything shifted. Caroline's mother called us, her voice frantic. "They found her," she cried. "Emma's alive." According to the police, Emma had been discovered in a small motel just outside the city. She was disheveled, shaken, and claiming she had run away because she felt unsafe after the family turned against her. Her parents were devastated, rushing to the motel to bring her home. Caroline cried tears of relief, but I felt a different emotion: suspicion. Emma's story didn't add up. How had she managed to stay completely off the radar for 2 weeks with no money? Why hadn't she contacted anyone sooner? And most importantly, why was she pointing the finger directly at me? "She said you were the reason she ran," Caroline told me that night, her voice cold. "She said you humiliated her at the wedding and made her feel like she didn't belong in her own family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You can't seriously believe that," I said. "Emma's manipulating you. This is exactly what she wants, everyone to focus on her." But Caroline wasn't having it. "You've hated her from the start," she snapped. "Maybe she's not the problem. Maybe you are." That was the moment I realized Emma had one. She had taken her petty vendetta to a whole new level, and it was working. Caroline's loyalty was shifting, and I was becoming the villain in my own marriage. What I didn't know was that Emma's plan didn't stop there. She was about to take things even further, and the fallout would be catastrophic for everyone involved. After Emma's dramatic return, she became the center of attention in the family. Her parents doted on her, apologizing endlessly for siding against her, and even Caroline began to treat her sister like some fragile, misunderstood victim. Meanwhile, I was being slowly pushed to the sidelines, labeled as the root of all Emma's problems. It didn't take long for Emma to start spreading more lies. She told Caroline that I had insulted her repeatedly during the wedding, calling her a burden and an embarrassment. She claimed I had tried to have her uninvited, going so far as to accuse me of telling the family they'd be better off without her. Caroline confronted me about it one night, her voice filled with doubt. "Did you really say those things?" she asked. "No," I said firmly. "You know me better than that, Caroline. Why would I stoop that low?" But her faith in me was clearly wavering. Emma's fake vulnerability was working, and I could feel my wife slipping further away. The worst part was that I couldn't prove anything. Emma had no real evidence to back her claims, but the damage was in her words, her tears, and the way she played the victim so convincingly. Things escalated when Emma dropped a bombshell at a family dinner. "I've decided to move back in with Mom and Dad for a while," she announced, glancing at me as though daring me to protest. "I need to be around people who make me feel safe." Her parents immediately agreed, thrilled to have her close again. Caroline, of course, supported the idea too. But I knew what Emma was really doing, cementing her position as the innocent party while painting me as the villain who had driven her to this. "Don't you see what she's doing?" I asked Caroline that night. "She's manipulating everyone, including you." Caroline shook her head, exasperated. "Why can't you just let it go? She's been through enough." I realized then that no matter what I said, Caroline wasn't going to believe me. Emma's lies had dug their claws into her, and I was powerless to stop it. But as much as Emma seemed to be winning, she underestimated one thing: her tendency to overplay her hand. The cracks in her story were starting to show, and soon, her carefully crafted narrative would begin to unravel. Emma's return to her parents' house was like the reset button she'd been waiting for. She had their sympathy, Caroline's full support, and the attention she craved. Meanwhile, I became the unspoken villain, the wedge in the family dynamic. Every interaction with Caroline became a battle. She stopped confiding in me and began spending more time at her parents' house to support Emma. But as much as Emma enjoyed her position, she couldn't resist pushing her luck. She started to embellish her stories, adding new layers to her victimhood. At first, they were small details, claims that I gave her hostile looks during the wedding or ignored her during family gatherings. Then, she began telling people that I had intimidated her and even tried to ruin her relationship with Caroline. The problem was, Emma didn't keep her lies consistent. When I overheard her telling one version of events to Caroline's parents and a completely different version to one of Caroline's friends, I realized her web of deceit was becoming too tangled to hold up. The breakthrough came during a casual conversation with Caroline's mother. She mentioned something Emma had said, that I had refused to let her help with the wedding planning because I thought she'd mess it up. It was absurd. I hadn't even been involved in those conversations. That's not true, I said, trying to keep my tone calm. I didn't make any decisions about the wedding planning. That was between Caroline and her bridesmaids. Caroline's mother frowned. That's strange. Emma said you told her directly. I could see doubt flicker in her eyes for the first time. Maybe she misremembered, I said carefully, not wanting to sound accusatory. But that seed of doubt was enough. Over the next few days, more inconsistencies in Emma's stories started coming to light. Caroline's father overheard Emma talking to a friend, casually joking about how easy it was to get sympathy when she needed it. Caroline's mother began noticing how conveniently Emma's stories changed depending on who she was talking to. The turning point came during a family dinner when Caroline's father, clearly fed up, asked Emma outright, "Why are your stories about the wedding so inconsistent?" Emma froze, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" she stammered. "You've told 3 different versions of why you spilled coffee on Caroline's dress," he said firmly. "What's the truth?" Emma fumbled for an answer, but the room had gone silent. All eyes were on her, and for the first time, she didn't have a quick, manipulative response. Caroline, sitting beside me, looked at her sister with confusion and suspicion. "I didn't mean to," Emma started, but her voice cracked. "It's not like I ruined the whole wedding on purpose." The slip was subtle, but it was enough. Everyone in the room caught it. Caroline turned to her, her voice shaking. "Emma, was it really an accident?" Emma's silence said everything. For the first time, Caroline seemed to realize the extent of her sister's lies. I could see the betrayal in her eyes as she pieced everything together. But this wasn't just about the wedding. It was about months of manipulation, the damage Emma had caused to our marriage, and the wedge she had driven into the family. But even as the truth began to surface, I knew Emma wouldn't go down without a fight. The final showdown was coming, and it would force Caroline to choose once and for all where her loyalties truly lay. Emma's slip at the family dinner set the wheels in motion. Over the next few days, Caroline's parents began confronting her about the inconsistencies in her stories. They had always supported their daughters, but this time, Emma's behavior was too blatant to ignore. Meanwhile, Caroline was quieter than usual, clearly grappling with the realization that her sister may not have been entirely honest. The tipping point came when Caroline's father discovered something unexpected. Sorting through some old mail Emma had left behind, he found a receipt from the motel where she'd stayed during her supposed disappearance. The date on the receipt? 2 days after the family dinner where Emma had stormed out. She hadn't been missing for 2 weeks. She'd been hiding out and crafting her elaborate lie. When he confronted her, Emma broke. "I just needed them to see how much they hurt me," she cried, still clinging to her victim act. "You all took his side without even thinking about how I felt." "Because you lied to us, Emma," her father said, his voice firm. "You ruined your sister's wedding, blamed it on him, and then doubled down with this ridiculous disappearance stunt." The news hit Caroline like a sledgehammer. She confronted Emma later that evening, demanding the truth. "Did you spill coffee on my dress on purpose?" she asked, her voice trembling. Emma hesitated, but finally nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I was upset," she admitted. "You didn't care how I felt about him. You didn't listen to me." Caroline's face fell as the full weight of Emma's manipulation settled over her. For months, she had allowed Emma to twist her perception, driving a wedge between me and the family. She realized now how much damage had been done, not just to me but to our marriage. When Caroline told me everything that night, her voice was heavy with regret. "I don't know how I let it get this far," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to feel relieved, vindicated even, but all I felt was exhaustion." "I don't care about being right," I said. "I just want us to stop letting her control our lives." Caroline promised to make things right, and for once, it felt like she meant it. She cut back on visits to her parents' house and started standing up to Emma, who, sensing her control slipping, began to isolate herself. Caroline's parents also made it clear that Emma's behavior would no longer be tolerated. But the damage wasn't something that could be undone overnight. Caroline and I had a long road ahead to rebuild the trust Emma had eroded. While I was hopeful for the future, I couldn't shake the lingering resentment, not just toward Emma but toward Caroline for letting it happen. As for Emma, she retreated into the background, her schemes finally exposed. But even as her influence faded, the scars she left behind remained a reminder of how easily one person's lies can tear a family apart. With Emma's lies fully exposed, the family dynamic was irreparably shaken. Caroline's parents were devastated, struggling to reconcile the daughter they had defended with the manipulative person she had proven to be. Emma, now completely cornered, refused to take responsibility for her actions and instead lashed out, accusing everyone of abandoning her. "You always side with him," she screamed during a final confrontation at her parents' house. "You never cared about me, only about making him look good." Caroline's father shook his head. "No, Emma, we cared about you, but you used that against us. Enough is enough." For once, Caroline didn't defend her sister. She sat silently beside me, her expression unreadable. After the confrontation, Emma packed her things and moved out, declaring that she would never forgive the family. No one stopped her, but the damage Emma had caused still lingered. My relationship with Caroline was strained, and though she apologized repeatedly for believing her sister, the trust between us had been deeply eroded. We both tiptoed around certain topics, unsure how to bridge the gap Emma had left. The family was left fractured, each member processing the fallout in their own way. Caroline's parents withdrew from social gatherings, embarrassed by Emma's behavior, while Caroline threw herself into work, avoiding the difficult conversations we desperately needed to have. I knew Emma was finally gone, but the question that haunted me was whether my marriage could survive what she had left behind. And as much as I tried to move forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that Emma